This is Chris D'Amico, and you are listening to the Creative Lighting Photography Podcast.
Thanks for tuning in. This is the Creative Lighting Photography Podcast. I am your host, Lucretia Kolba. In this episode, we spoke with Chris D'Amico, who is a lot of fun to talk to. Chris is a product photographer who has a way of lighting his images that really make you stop and look at the photograph. I think you're going to be really impressed when you go to his website. We have those links posted to the website and on our Facebook page, ChrisD'AmicoPhotography.com. Really fun guy to talk to, and I think you're really going to enjoy this interview. Some little technical things. I got an email today and had to go to the website to check it out. NikonRumors.com has a firmware update, which is now official according to NikonRumors.com. The various issues that users were having are now resolved. For example, issues that prevented the opening of movies recorded with the D7000 in certain movie editing software is resolved, along with several others. I will be sure to get that article and that link posted on the podcast notes, so those of you who are shooting with a Nikon D7000 can check that out. For workshops, there is a newborn photography workshop coming up in Atlanta, Georgia by Laura Brett. Her website is newborngoodness.com, and her workshops regard photographing newborns, discuss lighting, the business of photography, her workflow. I have her website posted on the podcast notes and on the Facebook page, so you can check that out. If you are a newborn photographer, that may be something of interest and for you to check out. Alright, I don't want to wait any longer. I really want to get to this interview with award-winning photographer Chris D'Amico, so here we go. So we're back at Westlight Studios in Franklin, Tennessee. This time we are talking today with award-winning photographer Chris D'Amico. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for coming down.
Yeah. So I'm going to start you off with a two-part question, because you are trained in art photography. So how did you get started in art photography, and how did that lead to product photography?
Sure. When I actually went to school initially for engineering.
Really?
And it just didn't fit. I didn't have the patience for the math. And it wasn't even that I didn't like the math or any of that stuff. I just didn't have the patience for it. And at the time, my girlfriend was in graphic design. I was like, well, that's a cool thing. I kind of check that out. Did, decently well in design, but I ended up photographing everything that was going into the designs. All of the, I would sort of making a sign, I'd put some letters together and I'd take a photo of it, and then I'd make the poster out of the photo.
Oh,
and so
cool.
when it came to portfolio review, the instructors were like, maybe you're on the wrong side of that. Switch to photography. And it was kind of a funky switch, too, because the design program was very corporate. The typography was very structured, and the illustration was very structured, and the photo side was super heavy art. A guy named Baldwin Lee was the instructor, the head of the department. And he's this brilliant little 4'10" Chinese-American guy who would go down to the swamps in Louisiana and photograph people doing just crazy stuff. So it was just super heavy kind of editorial style art, capturing people, photographing nothing.
Oh,
so
wow.
it was a weird switch between the two worlds, and they were of course across the hall from each other. So it's like one side's like everybody's buttoned up, and the other side people are like, hey man, I just spent 36 exposures on an outlet. So it was a strange kind of culture thing, but it was a good. And my aunt, who's a professional photographer in Seattle, when she learned that I was kind of switching programs, she bought me a Nikon FE1 with this beautiful little 50mm lens on it. So I kind of felt at that point I was kind of committed.
Right.
It's like, there was this incredible gift, and I was like, well, I can't can't turn around at this point. And so I stuck with it, and it's
Cool.
worked out pretty well.
Yeah.
As far as segueing into product photography, it was a little bit of a bumpy road. When the first couple of years, you know, you're looking for assistant gigs and you want to shoot as much as possible and you want to work with this guy and that guy and this girl and that girl, and, you know, is this almost one of those things where there's so many jobs in photography. I had to figure out, do I want to be a shooter? Do I want to be a producer? There's a huge market, some of the bigger markets for these, you know, professional grips, professional assistants, and they do super well, and they show up to work and they do their job and they go home, and there's not this like running your own shop thing. Is that what I wanted to do? So I struggled with that for a couple of years, and then I came onto a little company called Cabbage.com as their director of photography, or as they called it. I was called the salad shooter because they had goofy names for everybody. The guy that ran the place, Chris Blands, he basically was like, okay, all this stuff is awesome, but if you're going to make a business, here's a hole in the market in Nashville. And so I was like, well, I guess there's a hole in the market in Nashville, because everybody wants to shoot the next, you know, they want to shoot Taylor Swift, they want to shoot the next big country act, whoever, which is awesome.
Right.
But there's just not a ton of people that just shoot stuff. Because people don't want to be locked in a dark room with a coffee
That's
cup.
very true. Yeah, it's a very valid point. You're right. Yeah.
So, you know, and it can, there are definitely times where it can be dull. It's like, we have 64 diodes on 13 different boards. We'll see in 3 hours. It's
And
like,
go.
okay, I'm here for a while. So you put some good music on, you make another pot of coffee and work through it. But on the flip side of that, yeah, that may be the catalog side of doing it, but then you get to go shoot those diodes in the field, and they happen to be attached to, you know, a 64-ton train, which, you know, then it's like, okay, that was worth it.
Yeah.
You know,
very.
but yeah, Chris was very, very kind of cut and dry about it. He's like, if you're going to do product photography, corporate photography in this town, you know, we're looking at everything's got to be in focus. It's got to be tack sharp. You've got to have, you know, kind of the structured technical knowledge. And a lot of the technical knowledge came from the art school, because it was like, we may be shooting, you know, a portrait of a homeless guy, but technically everything had to be perfect, because that's all you had. It wasn't like this, we're taking this film, scanning it, going into Photoshop, moving stuff around. It was click, that's it. So that had to be perfect. So that kind of dovetails in that the attention to detail that came from the art has to translate to the product photography, because it's one of the things, nobody notices good product photography, everybody notices bad.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you're on Amazon, you're like, what is wrong with that picture? Why is that cut off? You know, you don't notice the perfectly lit, well-structured stuff. That's just the way it's supposed to look. So
Yeah.
it's definitely one of those things you kind of fight with.
Yeah, very cool. Well, that's a great background to know that schooling just kind of gave you one shot. That definitely prepared you for today. That's really cool. And speaking of your shots, let's discuss your style. I mean, your photography, when I was on your website, it gives like this really real, dramatic look. You know, I mentioned when I walked in here, I think one of my two favorites are the cupcakes. I mean, I remember my hand reaching for the screen. I'm like, what am I doing? It's like, that's a photograph. And then a kid, your cappuccino, and I'm like, wow, how are you able to take, you know, these non-movable, non-living, non-breathing objects and just bring such energy to them?
Well, I think with, especially with some of the food stuff, it's just a lot of fun to kind of build in, to kind of create a moment, even though there's not really a moment there. But you pour the milk in the coffee, and everybody knows that moment where it's like, there's that magic that happens, but it's like the mixing of the colors, and it's just like, ooh, it's so pretty.
Yeah.
You know, so especially with the food, it's kind of an opportunity to create a moment. Unlike portrait photography, where you're going to have to wait for something, or you're talking and the moment happens. With the products, it's definitely, you kind of have to create that. But I've always been big into building texture. I remember early in my career, I got hired for a carpet job.
Yeah.
Photographing carpet swatches, which in retrospect, they probably should have just scanned instead of pay me to photograph them. But whatever. It's a nightmare getting them perfectly evenly lit with like 18-inch square. And it was it was a rough job. But I just geeked out about how much texture was in these shags and this and that, and it was kind of from at that kind of this realization that I was like, I really love texture. So I feel like I'm always looking for things that have that texture. So you add that to kind of creating that mood, and you end up with or creating a moment rather. You end up with kind of a feel for how to create that moment that you want to be like, ooh, I want to grab that, I want to eat that, I want to pull it out. There's some cookies that are on the website too. These oatmeal raisin cookies. I kind of had this idea. I was like, what if we stack cookies next to a glass of whiskey?
Oh.
And I made those cookies like 4 times, because the first time I made them, they were like these perfectly, you know, they're little domes, and I was like, that's not going to work. So I made them again. They were a little chunkier, and then I made them again, and of course then they wouldn't stay together because there's too much stuff in them. But the 4th time,
Fourth time was a charm.
it had the right amount of, like, you know, oats to chocolate to, and it was just to find that right texture, because I feel like that's really what makes either texture or the lack of texture is kind of what makes a lot of that stuff sing. When you see an Apple product, you expect it to be flawless, you know, and when you see a bowl of food, you want to see all that texture and all that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so.
Yeah. Well, you do it very well.
Thank you.
I was really enjoying going through that. I was very impressed. And speaking of Apple, you being an award-winning photographer who has shot for some pretty big names, is it just another day in the office when like Apple and CSX and Army National Guard call you up? I mean, how do you react to that? Those are big deals.
Yeah. It's not an everyday in the office. It's amazing when the phone rings and it's like, hey, this is so and so from this agency. We want you to, act as an embedded reporter for 4 days in the desert with the National Guard. And I'm like, what? Excuse me? Sure. And so you definitely kind of have to jump on those when the phone rings. I remember we did some work with 12 South, is the Apple only manufacturer. The rate wasn't just great, but I was like, this is not one of those things where I need to be like, well, for this rate, so we just jumped on it and made it happen. And yeah, it's very exciting when that happens, but no, that's not an everyday thing.
Yeah, I was pretty impressed going through, your portfolio. I'm like, my gosh, who haven't you shot for? It's like Yeah,
there's been a lot.
That's really awesome. That's really exciting. So with the different things that you've done for these companies, you've shot welders, food, people. Have you been at a shoot where things got a lot more complicated than you had expected?
Sure. It's never the shoots that you expect to be complicated that are complicated. Like the industrial door shoot it was a live factory. This company makes welding, or it makes blast doors and hangar doors for the military, and they've got probably 80% of the market as it is, and they wanted to launch this big brand campaign to try to capture more of that 20% they didn't have. And so you've got this warehouse that is, I think it was 1,000 feet from end to end, and they're building these doors, these huge doors in one piece in the middle of the floor. And we had scheduled the shoot, and they were, hey, we're in the middle of production, so if you guys want to still come in and shoot, that's fine. So we're shooting live floor, guys welding and grinding, and at one point a light got knocked over from one of the overhead cranes. I mean, it was just like, it was crazy. But it really wasn't that difficult to shoot, because it was, I'm like, hey, cross your arms, look mean. All right, we're done. Great, next setup. It's we photograph a pillow for Singer. And we spend 2 hours styling the edges of the pillow. And it's like, oh my goodness, really, it's a pillow. We could have fixed this in Photoshop. Those are the shoots that completely get out of hand, because you're like, it's a bookmark. Fantastic. Shoot it. Oh, that looks like trash. Okay, how do we fix this?
Yeah.
So it's funny, the shoots that kind of spiral out of control are usually the extremely simple ones. The more complicated one, I guess you can just hide some of the imperfections in the well, yeah, it's supposed to look like that because there's something exploding in the background. Because
Exactly.
Naturally, why wouldn't there be an explosion in a warehouse? You could sell that.
Exactly.
But it's just like a pillow on a couch. It's like, why is the pillow crooked? Frizzle. All right, fine. We'll adjust it.
We'll adjust it. We'll fix it. Now I've done some welding, not a lot. I'm not any nearby pro, but you can't look at this light. So when you're in there with these welders, how did you?
Very carefully. There's a little bit of I had a neutral, like a half-stop neutral density on the front of the camera and a polarizer, a circular polarizer, so that helped cut back on some of the glare. But there's like something with the diffusion of looking through the lens, hit the mirror, and then back up through the viewfinder. I think it broke it up enough that I wasn't necessarily seeing spots.
That's
But,
good.
Yeah.
That's good. When I saw it, when your welding pictures came up, I'm like, all right, I'm very curious. I just got to ask.
Well, the plasma torch too. Those big plasma torch cutters. That light burns brighter than the welding.
Oh wow.
The oxyacetylene torches and stuff. So yeah, and every machine shop from here to LA has one of those big flatbed plasma cutters that burns at who knows how many millions of degrees or
That's
something
intense.
ridiculous. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. So on the technical side of things, we like to talk about studio gear and lighting. What is your favorite light modifier?
Right now, and probably has been for the last 2 years, my favorite modifier is a beauty dish. I think it's fantastic. It's easy to bring to places. It's tough. Somebody kicks it. It's not going to randomly collapse on the end of a light if somebody doesn't set it up right. And it provides a nice, soft, but still directional light. That plus just a 7-inch bare head with a reflector, with a grid spot on it. I mean, that's 90% of what I shoot. Doesn't
Wow.
matter if it's a person or if it's a product. Every now and then we'll have to put more diffusion on something if you've got, a mirror finish or something like that. But typically, it's 2 beauty dishes and 2 bare heads with grids.
Oh wow. So what lenses do you use?
My kind of everyday walk around lens. I've got a 24 to 105 f4 Canon that I used almost on, again, probably on 90% of that stuff. Other two lenses are, I've got a fixed 85, which is a macro, and it's glorious. It's one of those things where the planets aligned when they were making it, and
Nice.
it just
That's
is
awesome.
just, yeah. I'd actually sent it off to get it fixed a couple of months ago, and I kind of cried a little putting it in the box.
It gets scary when you got
Yeah.
something you like and you have to send it off because it's like, oh,
Yeah, be careful with that.
please handle with kill.
Yeah. Well, we rent lenses. The most common lens that I usually rent is a fixed 35. So, and then every now and then a 105. But again, the 105 is like a macro for like a jewelry application or something like that. But typically it's that 24 to 105. I just use that all the time. And there, of course, there are specific applications where it's like, we've got to get a Schneider shift tilt deal or a Anita Zeiss, whatever. But in the bag, it's, I say in the bag, usually it's just stuck on the camera and the camera goes in the bag and that's that. Run across something where
Yeah.
we need something else. It's like, can somebody run to the rental house real quick?
You speaking of lens rentals, who do you use? Who do you like for lens rentals?
Just had a company called lensrentals.com open up here in an office in Nashville. They're I guess originally out of Memphis, and they're fantastic. They're really good. There's another company here in town called the video company TVC, and they're more video based than still based, but they still carry all of the accoutrements now that the DSLRs are shooting video, and they do a really good job too. They've got a ton of stuff, but Lens Rentals they're a little cheaper and they're almost a little easier because you call TVC, which is it's just a warehouse with a bunch of dudes doing stuff. It's like, hey, do you guys have this, and this? And sometimes they have it, and sometimes they don't. And Lens Rentals is more of a, you go on the website and you can see exactly what's,
Oh, nice.
what's in stock, what's not in stock. So,
Cool. Very cool. So what would you say to someone who wants to get into product photography?
run.
That's very reassuring.
No, the thing with product photography, which I still on a daily basis kind of wrestle with. It's as complicated or as simple as you want to make it. There's nothing wrong with getting a little light tint, throwing a couple lights in it, and shooting it. On the flip side, there's a video that came out a couple of years ago about the Macworld photographer shooting the cover of the magazine, and it was two iPhones laying on each other, and he ended up using 17 lights and 4 or 5 diffusion panels and 6 or 7 flags. This is huge production. So,
Oh my gosh.
so with that in mind, the product photography world can be difficult to make money at because it's like, all right, how can I keep my cost as low as possible? Sell this to this manufacturer that might or might not bite. But at the same time, knowing that kind of in the back of your head, you're like, I want to set up 35 lights and make this thing look like it's floating in space, and we could do this all in the camera. And knowing that, okay, well, if they're only willing to pay X, we have to make this work in this amount of time. Because really, unlike some of the celebrity photography and some of the I wouldn't say more interesting from a resale value, location stuff, that product photography, pretty much that widget that company makes is pretty much centric to them. So very rarely is there an opportunity where you're going to be able to get residual rights or resell it. So it comes down to that economy of time. All right, if I can shoot X number of products in X number of hours and I'm getting, whether it's a day rate, an hour rate, or a price per product, how much could we fit in to make that work? So it's a little bit of a different model than, some of these guys that I'm in the studio with. They shoot, I don't know, some famous country person, and they get 2 years of the rights and they get to resell it, and it's a little bit of a different business model. So I would just say, make sure that you're good at saving money. And that maybe you sit down with somebody who really knows the business side of things and dig in and say, okay, so how can I figure out a pricing model that I can make money doing it and not lose my rear? Because ultimately it's all about photography's photography. It's about relationships. It's about who you know. People hire their buddies. If you've got that part down, then that's the fun part. And then it's okay. If I've got this client that's got 100 products that need to be shot over the next 6 months, what's the least I can charge to make the most amount of profit so that everybody feels good with that relationship? Mm-hmm. That's the tricky part. That's the Cajun cooking, if you will.
Right? Yeah.
So, and there's, I think, here in Nashville, there's not a ton of product photographers, and there are some markets that are flush with them. So it's just an interesting mix.
I like that you mentioned the business side. I think that's some place where a lot of photographers fall short, not meaning to. That they have the artistic eye, they can compose it, they can break the rules, but then they struggle going day to day because they don't ever realize this is a business.
Right.
They have to take it as a business. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. So we have a little, almost like a game, if you will, of doing some quick shot questions.
Awesome.
Are you game?
Absolutely.
All right. What is your favorite subject to photograph?
I like industrial, gritty. I grew up on the How Things Work TV show and with books, and I just love to get in and take photos of stuff that, like, how does that work? And with that too, the people that go along with that, because those are always unbelievable. I really like the odd too, like the weirder the better, like the freak show people, the people that are still doing the old school carnivals, and that's just like, what? Where do you live during normal business hours? I love that stuff. It's just, we've got a new neighbor that moved in. He walked out of his house in like a full gaucho thing, thigh-high boots, and a big leather hat. And I just was standing there at the window, and I just went, yes! My wife's like, what are you talking about? I was like, look what he's wearing! That's incredible! I love that stuff that you're like, that breaks every mold. And he's an IT director too, which is even better. I love it. Maybe because I don't think I have the courage to do some of that myself. So the people that actually are like, I'm doing it. I'm like, hell yeah, you are. That's awesome.
That is awesome. What is your favorite website?
It's lame and it's boring, but lately I've been geeking out over the new Nat Geo site. The National Geographic's been sending me these emails with these little blurbs. Mm-hmm. Some dude just did an article on bees, and somebody else went back and did all this archival stuff from Africa from the 1870s, and I just I sit on it for way too long, hours, just going, oh really, look at this and look at this and look at this, and I know it's kind of trite, but that's been my thing lately. I tell you a great resource. There's a website called No Film School. Man, they just have so much cool stuff. And I mean, obviously it's all kind of motion-based, but since the tools are so similar and the techniques are so similar, it's really been cool to go through and be like, hey, here's a wireless monitor that you can turn into, that you can make from an Android phone. Just stuff like that. Yeah. It's like, that's cool. It doesn't make sense for me necessarily, but it's cool that it happens, and so that's another one that I've been messing around with.
Very nice. I'll have to check those out. Photoshop or Lightroom?
Both. Depends on the application. Yeah, we use a lot of Lightroom. That's what we shoot tethered to, which we probably should be shooting into Capture One or something, but everybody knows Lightroom, and it's an Adobe product, and it kind of works seamlessly with Photoshop. Mm-hmm. And again, with the products too, there's a lot of times where, hey, we want a shadow there. Oh, well, since we already shot it, looks like we're going to do that in Photoshop. But yeah, definitely not Bridge, though.
Yeah.
I don't use Bridge.
What is something that's inspired you in photography?
That's an interesting question. I think the thing, going back to what I was saying before, I love textures. I'm such a texture guy. I love we'll be driving around town or, and I'll drive past some old building and it's just the wall's busted out and there's a hole in it and the frost has hit the side of the wall from the compressor next door and you've got this crazy texture thing. I just love that stuff. I've got an e-buddy, somebody that I follow on Twitter and Instagram. We've kind of talked back and forth a couple times. His name's Evan Rothman, and he does these natural history and these racing shots done in South Africa. And they're phenomenal. But again, it's all about the texture, because it's just it's a little stock car and it's coming around the corner. But as it's coming around the corner, you've got this perfectly exposed, beautiful, almost Photoshop-looking dust cloud that is almost making a face behind it. Or, he's got this telephoto lens of a lion sitting there looking directly at the camera, and you can see the fly sitting on the lion's nose. It's just all about this texture, and stuff like that really inspires me. That there's it's that moment of, and it's just, there's the technical perfection, and there's this textural element, and there's a lot of separation from the background. That type of stuff really, yeah.
Yeah, I've learned I need to keep my camera handy because I'll see things like that, and it's pull it over.
Yeah, well, I'm big with my Instagram account. Nothing goes in the Instagram account that's not shot with the phone. And I don't know why. It doesn't make any sense. I don't know.
It doesn't have to make sense. I kind of like that, actually.
I just feel like it's kind of disingenuous to put something up that's not from the source that you're looking at. I don't know. Whatever. It doesn't make any sense. But so it's like, it's been kind of fun to be like, ooh, I've got all these photo apps because I try to only shoot with the phone when I'm putting it on Instagram. So it'll be like, click. Okay, great. Which app do I want to use to...
That's kind of fun, though. I like that. That's very cool. What is your favorite music to shoot to?
I'll preface this with saying I listen to a lot of music, and there's very little that I don't enjoy. But when I'm shooting, unless there's some moral dilemma or something like that against it, it's all hip-hop, particularly 90s hip-hop. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's kind of my, and it's funny, some of the, especially in Nashville with a lot of Christian music and a lot of people that are big into that whole scene and just kind of immersing themselves in it. It was interesting, some of the looks that come in when they walk into the studio and I've got, Jay-Z turned all the way up and they're like, what is this? Like, what? It's Jay-Z? What are you talking about? He's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's hip hop.
That's
definitely.
good energy music, especially for what you're doing. That's really...
Yeah. Well, and that's another thing too, is when we're shooting stuff, draped fabrics, and we've got 400 products to make through in 3 days, you want to create a fun environment. You want to create an environment people want to be in. Because it's easy to kind of get that humdrum, okay, we're shooting the same thing again, which is really one of the big things when I screen for assistants. It's like, can you guys hang? Can you stand there for 10 hours while we shoot a flat object and try to light it exactly like we lit the one before? Can you hang? Because there's some people that are like, I can't handle this. I'm going to go crazy.
Yeah.
Which I get. I understand that side of it. But I'm also going, if we make it through this, then we get to go to their warehouse where they're using some crazy technology and lasers. So let's see the trade-off here, But
yeah. Do you have a photo shoot or a location that you would love to do or be at?
If I could do anything, if money wasn't an object, I've got 2 little boys and a wife that we've been so fortunate that she has been able to work when she wants to, not when she has to, which is incredible.
That's awesome.
But if I could do anything, I would travel the world and find the strangest, most bizarre corners of the world and just shoot the junk out of them. I want to have one of those cheesy pictures of the guy selling trinkets at the base of the Himalaya. I want to go and shoot the vineyards in Argentina and talk to the guy who's 97 years old, that's been there forever. Just want to put a camera on and be like, dude, just tell me your story.
Absolutely.
That's the type of stuff that I think if I could shoot anything, that's what I'd shoot. The reality of flying all over the world and doing that stuff is a little bit different. But I think it comes down to, anything. Going back to that, let's find something that's off, what we consider quote unquote normal here in the U.S. So.
Yeah. Nice. What is something that can always be found in your camera bag, like all reliable?
Gum. I might have a little bit of trouble if I don't have my gum with me. I don't know why. As you can imagine, standing in the dark for several hours at a time, we drink a lot of coffee.
Right, yeah.
So maybe that's where it started, but now it's like gum. And it's a great icebreaker too, especially when we're in a situation where we are at a facility where there's just folks that just aren't, here's a strange dude and he's got this stuff and maybe he's dressed a little funny and, he wants to come in and take a photo of me. Why am I going to have a photo taken? I didn't comb my hair. I didn't, there's this thing that happens. And a lot of times it's like, hey man, piece of gum. There's just this icebreaker that just kind of works.
Nice.
So, yeah.
I love that. That's awesome. So if someone who wants to see your work, where do they find you? I'm
online. It's chrisdamico.com. I'm Chris with a K and no H. D'Amico Photo is my other internet handle. I try to use the same one. So it's at D'Amico Photo on Twitter, and I think the Facebook page is at D'Amico Photo, facebook.com/ I think. I could be wrong there.
We'll get those links posted
awesome.
On the website and, of course, on our Facebook page, and we'll put in our podcast notes. And we really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're very, very busy, which is awesome, but we really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us.
Well, thanks for coming down. This has been fun.
Yeah, it has been fun. Great!
Thank you for joining us on this episode with Creative Lighting Photography Podcast. We hope you enjoyed this conversation we had with Chris D'Amico. He's a really nice guy, really down-to-earth, interesting individual, talented photographer, and we definitely encourage you to go check out his website, check out his Facebook page. Speaking of Facebook, make sure you like us on Facebook, and check out our Flickr page, add some photos, start a discussion, and we will catch up with you next time.